Hey, what's up there, kid? My name is Jack Mandeville, and this is Jacked History. Rhode Island is one of my favorite American states, easily top 3. I try to make it out there at least once a year. Perfect summertime weather, a friendly population, intoxicating ocean smells, car rides through perfectly quaint Rockwellian towns, buying lobster straight cash from the fishermen pulling into the docks, and the clam chowder. Oh, don't even get me started on that chowder. I've been known to drink my weight in chowder. Notice how I said drink and not eat. I straight up just put chowder in a big mug and drink it. I drink that white gold. It's, of course, most commonly known as America's smallest state, geographically, and one of the smallest states in population, often overshadowed by their neighbors in Massachusetts, who are a big brand name in American colonial and modern history.
The spirit of Massachusetts is the spirit of America, the spirit that we want to share with you.
Many of our country's most known revolutionary events took place in Massachusetts and concerned Massachusetts figures. Every American boy and girl learns about the Boston Massacre, which stirred revolutionary sentiments, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which are considered the first shots of the American Revolution, and the Boston Tea Party, which saw Massachusetts men in open revolt of British taxes. And in those major events were names like John Adams, Paul Revere, and Sam Adams. Big brand Massachusetts, hogging up all the revolutionary glory. But what if I told you that on June 9th, 1772, over a year before the Boston Tea Party in particular, there was a group of Rhode Islanders who were going even harder against the British. And one could argue they were even more instrumental in escalating the American colonies towards revolution. Today, we're talking about the Gaspee affair and how batshit nuts Rhode Islanders were. But like most of my episodes, there's always a backstory to the meat of the story. We need to start 130 years prior to 1772 with a guy by the name of Roger Williams. Rog was originally from England and trained in his religious studies there, but grew sick of the Church of England, which was essentially a government-sanctioned religious organization. So he hopped on board to the New World with his cool new religious sect called the Separatist Puritans, landing in modern Massachusetts in his late 20s. To sum him up as a person, Rog had deep convictions about a lot of things, mainly his firm belief in the separation of church and state, and religious freedom, something the Church of England loyalists around Massachusetts were still having a hard time letting go of. Additionally, he was very vocal with the fact that he thought it was bullshit that the English settlers and the Crown was taking native lands without properly compensating them. While the idea of separating government and religion and properly compensating people for their land is common thought nowadays, Williams was considered a damned heretic back then, and basically he was ran out of Massachusetts. So he left, found a good chunk of neighboring land, properly acquired it from the indigenous Narragansett peoples, and founded what we know today as Rhode Island, naming it Providence. It was a society in its origins that was built on rugged individualism, freedom of religion, and it attracted those who didn't want to conform to the English crown or the Church of England. Rhode Island was, in a nutshell, built on all of the things we expect and value in today's America. It set the precedent. While the settlers of Massachusetts were still licking King Charles I's ass, who we briefly covered in a previous episode, Rog and his followers were doing the most American thing you can do: rage quitting something when you don't like it and deciding to do your own thing. The spirit of Rhode Island is the spirit of America. They just have never been as good at marketing themselves like their neighbors in Massachusetts. Anywho, I could do an entire episode on Roger Williams, but let's jump ahead to the Rhode Island of the 1770s. The place that Williams founded was still very much made up of a group of people who wanted to live life on their terms, and the British still very much had control of New England. And if you've watched previous episodes of mine, you'd know that Britain was just coming out of a solid W in the 7 Years' War, which ironically was pretty much started by a Virginia fella by the name of George Washington. In order to pay off the debts of that massive conflict, they were putting the clamps down on American colonists through a variety of taxes and policies. One of those policies was to start enforcing the Navigation Act, which pretty much limited the colonists' ability to trade how they wanted and gave more oversight to British authorities. The problem was, in Rhode Island in particular, smuggling was a ginormous business. These people were expert sailors and port workers who had been making a shitload of money in smuggling rum and other goods. The British attempt to stop them was putting their entire economic framework in jeopardy. Because it's the money. It always comes down to the money. We can romantically discuss our founding daddies' ideals of liberty and freedom all we want, but every motive for every major action in the history of the world boils down to the money, and sometimes pussy. That's a deeper rant I'll save for another day. Anywho, enter British naval officer Lieutenant William Dunningston and his schooner ship, the HMS Gaspee. And though we often associate British officers during the Revolutionary years as being English, it should be noted that Dunningston was Scottish. Dunningston was not only Scottish, he was also an extreme bastard. And the people of Rhode Island would see it play out when he and the Gaspee were sent to enforce Britain's crackdown on illegal smuggling. And let's remember, Rhode Island culture was still very much descended from the ideals and actions of Roger Williams, and their political ruling class of the time was hell-bent on keeping it that way. Locals had already torched some British customs enforcement ships in the years leading up to the Gaspee's arrival. They didn't want to answer to the much larger Massachusetts colony next door, and they certainly didn't want to answer to the British. As soon as the Gaspee showed up to Rhode Island's Narragansett Bay in February of 1772, Dunningston wasted no time in pissing people off. They were stopping, boarding, and searching random ships without cause. They'd seize cargo that wasn't proven to be smuggled goods, and sometimes they'd even seize people's personal property. And they were just pure dicks about the whole matter. Rhode Island sailors and merchants were beginning to seethe with anger. One thing that can clearly explain Dunningston's and the Gaspee crew's motives was that they were promised a percentage of any seized goods. So, of course, they're going to be heavy-handed in how they go about things. They were basically just enforcing law on commission. And yes, in fairness, a lot of what they were seizing was illegally transported rum. But again, that was just Rhode Island's sailing and merchant culture of the time. It was their moneymaker. They didn't know any better. They were just poor babies. That wasn't in the script, but Dunningston was seizing and collecting ships like they were infinity stones. In one case, he seized a smuggling ship and its items, then sent the ship and its crew up to Boston to stand trial. His mindset was that the Rhode Islanders would steal and reclaim the ship, which those crazy bastards were absolutely doing whenever one of their ships got taken. But that's where Dunningston royally fucked up. He had completely underestimated American colonial culture. Rhode Island existed because it didn't want to be like Massachusetts. And now they were sending Rhode Island property and people to Massachusetts to receive judgment from Massachusetts people. He was directly spitting in the face of Rhode Island's legal autonomy. After that, it just got worse. He got even more aggressive in his search and seizure practices. Just pure bully shit. At this point, the governor of Rhode Island was demanding Dunningston either show proof of his orders to be there or just leave, neither of which Dunningston did. It all culminated on June 9th, 1772. Around 2 p.m., the Gaspee entered into pursuit of a local packet ship it suspected of being a smuggling vessel, which it probably was. The thing with packet ships is they were designed to easily float on shallow levels of water. The Gaspee, however, was not designed for that, and Dunningston's dumbass ran the ship aground during the pursuit. That's naval talk for he got that fucker stuck on a sandbar in the bay. They had to watch in frustration as the ship they were chasing sailed off victorious. Then they had to wait in frustration for high tide to hit so they could get themselves free. But that wasn't going to happen for them. The escaped packet ship made their way back to port, and news spread fast that those bastards on the Gaspee were stuck in place. Laughing about it would have totally been an understandable response. but they wanted more. Local trader and smuggler John Brown wasted no time gathering up other pissed off Rhode Islanders to go deal with Dunningston once and for all. And no, he's not the other John Brown who was instrumental in kicking off the American Civil War, but you could say that this John Brown was also notable because he was about to be instrumental in kicking off the American Revolution. Not only that, he was the same John Brown who was instrumental in founding Ivy League Brown University and was a prominent leader in the Rhode Island chapter of the Sons of Liberty, who are most famous for their involvement in the Boston Tea Party a year later. At around 10 p.m., Brown had gathered a flotilla of 8 longboats carrying over 60 well-armed men led by Captain Abraham Whipple. That is the most 18th century American colonial name I've ever seen. Sorry, I didn't even finish that sentence. Led by Captain Abraham Whipple, who would go on to be a commander in the Continental Navy years later. It was a 7-mile journey from them to the stranded Gaspee. The moon was full, and in order to avoid detection, they had to keep a tight formation and muffle their oars. Shortly after midnight, the Rhode Islanders were spotted as they approached the helpless ship, in which Whipple proclaimed that they were there to arrest Dunningston and the crew. The colonists boarded the boat as the befuddled British were still trying to organize. Brief musket fire was exchanged, and it was Dunningston himself who was shot in the groin. They frickin' shot him, Peter! Then they rushed and subdued the rest of the crew. They boarded all of the Gaspee's crew into their boats and set fire to the Gaspee, watching it burn as they floated off. And right as the sun was coming up, the fire hit the ship's gunpowder room and created a blast that shattered windows miles away. The Gaspee was now just a pile of smoldering wooden shit in a Rhode Island bay. Oh, you're so cool, Boston. You're so cool up there in Boston. You guys threw some tea in the harbor. Yeah, real badass stuff, tossing tea in the harbor. These Rhode Island nutjobs were shooting British officers near their dicks and burning down their ships. I'm sure the Brits were completely understanding of the Rhode Islanders' actions, right? After Dunningston was ransomed, the Brits attempted to come down hard on the accused, including Brown. But nothing came of it because nobody talked. They straight up couldn't find a single legitimate witness to testify against the accused because they were all in lockstep about keeping their mouths shut, even in the face of a 500-pound reward, which was an insane amount of money back then. Even the governor had all of the locals' backs and was playing stupid during his investigation, despite calls for justice in London. Rhode Islanders were gangsters. Dunningston would go back into service and go on to have a successful naval career, commanding ships against the colonials during the subsequent revolution, and would retire as an admiral in 1794. While the shot heard around the world is connected to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, which occurred almost 3 years later, one could argue the true shot that sent the Americas into revolution was the one that nearly missed William Dunningston's dick. Hey, before we wrap this up, I just want to remind you that Jacked History is now doing exclusive episodes for Pepperbox TV. We'll still be releasing episodes here on YouTube, of course, but at Pepperbox, you'll be able to view them 24 hours prior and get episodes you can't see anywhere else, like this one, about a person that was so horrible that it made me never want to research and write a true crime episode ever again. And last, I want to give a personal shout out. My cousin Kelsey, who is the daughter of my Uncle Neil that I gave a shout out to in a previous episode for being the coolest guy I know for running marathons in his 70s, was also an athlete. Kelsey and I are the same age. She was a multi-sport athlete growing up who was a pioneer in girls hockey being played in Minnesota at the varsity level. She also played college hockey. Her and her horde of collaborators, who are former athletes themselves, recently released this book, Soul of an Athlete, Stories and Lessons on Life Post-Athletics. A couple of reasons I'm excited to promote this is that I watched some documentary Michael Phelps made a few years back while I was on an airplane about the mental health struggles of former Olympians and what they go through when they're done. And I'm going to be honest with you, it made me really sad. And the other reason is that I somehow have worked with and had a lot of interactions with former professional athletes over the years. Big MMA names, NFL guys, a couple ball players here and there. And I've heard it from them too. Despite what people assume is millions of dollars in the bank and all the admiration in the world, many of these folks have real struggles when it's all over because they've lost the most important thing a human being can have: purpose. They have to rediscover who they are and what they bring to the world. Anywho, Soul of an Athlete is about that. Check out Kelsey's website, afterthejerseycoaching.com, to purchase the book and learn other ways to navigate life after sports. I myself wasn't an outstanding athlete like Kels. I wasn't terrible. I just didn't find a lot of joy in it. She got the athletic genes, and I got the I'd rather smoke pot and play Madden football on my PS1 because that sounds a lot more fun than waking up at 7 a.m. in August to do actual football two-a-days during my summer break genes. Please like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification button, or I'm going to make a physical threat towards Peter that I won't execute on.
Rhode Island, a state in the Bay. Rhode Island, eat some chowder today. Dump, grill your ass off in your chowder and watch. Checked! Here's